Perfect. So welcome back, everybody, and I'm going to hand over to Emma from the University of Hertfordshire. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Hi, everybody. Can I just check, is Nikki on the call yet? Just looking at the time. She's not up just yet, but I can't see her, but maybe she's about to come in.
Yeah, I've not seen her pop in yet.
Okay. Well, I'll just crack on and then hopefully she comes in the next sort of 15 minutes. I've got a backup plan if she can't make it, but she's assured me that she's going to be here, so I'm sure it'll all be fine. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, super. Everybody, it's really nice to be here. Thank you so much for organising this, Geraldine. Really appreciate you putting the time in to bring this crowd together. So as I said earlier, my name's Emma. I am from the University of Hertfordshire, where we've recently started a degree apprenticeship programme for speech and language therapy. And so what I'll talk through today, sort of not dissimilar to the structure Carol used really, but I'll go just briefly into a little bit of detail about how our programme kind of looks, the shape of it, the different things that we cover in different years, and then I'll touch on ways that we are working with or would like to work with people like yourselves or different partners that we have who aren't directly within our university. Because we are a new programme, so we're still very much growing that network. So it's really great to be talking to you today to hopefully give you some ideas about how you may potentially want to work with us. So I'll just move on. So why the programme gets set up, I suppose, first question. I think Carol touched on this really nicely, but in the local area in Herts and West Essex especially, it was highlighted to the university that there's a real difficulty with recruitment and retention within the SLT profession, and I don't think that's unique to our area necessarily. That's something we probably all feel. But the local trusts worked really closely with the university in developing and establishing the programme. So the idea is that people who are in assistant speech and language therapy roles would be eligible for potentially eligible for the apprenticeship programme, depending on the qualifications that they have as a background. And the other great thing about the University of Hertfordshire, I think, is that there's a really vibrant kind of health profession, allied health group there. So we sit within the School of Health, Medical and Life Sciences. And some of the other AHP programs are things like occupational therapy. So there's a really successful occupational therapy degree apprenticeship program at Hertfordshire, and the speech and language therapy program was developed largely mirroring the structure and the design of that program. But there's other programs as well, like dietitians, for example. And so one of the nice things about working at the University of Hertfordshire is that we get to deliver interprofessional sessions and training across these groups. We'll do teaching for the other AHP professions. So I did some teaching as part of the physio programme last week. I think Nikki's been teaching for the dietetics course this morning. So there's kind of lots of interprofessional working and learning going on, which is also really great. So just a little bit more, I suppose, of a background on the programme. So we are very new. We were approved back in February 2024, and the development of the programme kind of that year. Mentioned previously, it was co-designed with employers and SLT professionals in the region. So there were lots of meetings held across that year. Some of the team who are currently employed now were involved in that when they were in their SLT roles. It's a 4-year programme. So we also have a January start, so it can be a little bit tricky to get your head around. I think if you're used to the kind of typical September start model, but we start in January. It's a 4-year programme, but it's essentially 3 academic levels that are spread across the 4 years. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute, just to kind of hopefully make that really clear. We had our first cohort starting in January 2025, so at the beginning of this year. Our initial cohort is quite small. We have 10 at the moment. We're just doing our interviews for our next cohort as we speak, and we've got some already offered places. So we will be having an increase in numbers from January next year, but it's not on the scale of the Reading numbers, Carol, because the apprenticeship model is quite different in terms of how we in the kind of education sector work with the NHS and the partners that we kind of work with. So I'll talk about that as I progress through my slides. But we're kind of looking at numbers roughly 20 a year, broadly speaking, at the moment. Again, because it's an apprenticeship model, these people are working in clinical roles. They might be working in the NHS, they might be working in the private sector. So they work for the 4 days a week, and then they attend university for their teaching on 1 day a week. And that's full time. So they don't have kind of the long summer breaks that, again, you might typically associate with higher education. They have designated annual leave within the university calendar. So that usually looks like 2 weeks around Easter, 2 weeks in August, and then time off 2 weeks over the Christmas period. So it is a little bit more logistically, I suppose, challenging for the apprentice on the journey, because obviously they're working. The annual leave that is given at the university basically means they don't attend for the teaching. That doesn't mean that they are off from their roles during that time. Oh, hi, Nikki. Thanks, Geraldine. So yeah, they have 1 day a week teaching usually when they come in. There are a few exceptions to that. So when they first start for their induction, they'll be with us for a full week. And then there's a couple more modules within there where we do blocked teaching, as we call it, where they will be with us for a full week, or in some cases 2 weeks. But generally, it's sort of working 4 days a week and studying 1 day a week. It's also worth, I think, noting here that there is some discretion for the employer to be a little bit flexible with that. So some employers may give their apprentice flexi time on half a day a week or a couple of hours to do some study within that, but there's no requirement to do that in order to enrol an apprentice on the programme. Our programme at Hertfordshire as well is mainly online in terms of how we in terms of how we deliver our teaching. So we have a campus in Hatfield, and the apprentices come in for their teaching the majority of the time. We do have some online study days within each module. Usually that's just 1 or 2. And the feedback is that they really enjoy the in-person kind of model of teaching, and they get a lot out of that, and they can really build peer relationships to support their learning and development as well through that method. We also have placements at the end of each of the academic levels. So they have 3 placements overall, and they're block placements of 6 weeks. And during those placements, they are released from their usual employment. They will not be attending for their teachings. They'll just be on placement in that window, basically. So again, it's a slightly different the employer needs to understand that these are the requirements of the programme when they're enrolling an apprentice onto the course. They will be released from their usual work throughout the programme. So, as I mentioned, they attend for the teaching 1 day a week, and at the moment that day alternates depending on the level that they're being taught. So at the moment, our current cohort, our first years, they're in their level 4. They are attending on a Wednesday. And there's quite a lot of information on this slide, but I thought it was useful to just give a little bit of an overview of the types of content that we cover at the different steps of the programme. So I think, Carol, you mentioned that you have kind of a paediatric focused year and an adult focused year. We don't quite have it broken up like that. So in our level 4 or in our first year, they will kind of cover basic introductions to lots of things that they need to know about. They'll do phonetics and linguistics, they'll cover psychology and language development, they'll do anatomy, etc. As we progress through the programme, that's when they get more clinically focused modules. So acquired communication and swallowing, that's where they'll cover the kind of adult neuro aspects of things. We've got some voice and disfluency. We've also got interprofessional practice and partnership. So these kind of modules that are not specific to SLT necessarily, they're common across the programs at Hertfordshire. So often we'll build in our interprofessional sessions that I mentioned earlier within those types of modules. And we also work quite a lot with experts by experience. So we have a group of experts by experience at the university who support us with lots of different bits in the program, but one of those is teaching in those sorts of modules as well. Move on, just mindful of the time. I also just wanted to briefly touch on the assessments, because again, thinking about opportunities for in the programme, where I think there is definitely scope for that. So quite a lot of our assessments are professional discussions, they might be doing presentations, or what we call an OSCE, so an objective structured clinical exam. So an OSCE is essentially different clinical stations where the learner will go round and demonstrate different clinical skill at the different station. It might be an assessment, interpretation, it might be deciding on recommending an intervention that they're going to do, etc. So they're quite staff intensive things to deliver, because we need at least 4 or 5 people on hand for that type of assessment, and we are quite a small team, which I will come on to in a minute. So just to give you a bit of a flavour for that, and we have those different types of assessment across the different levels. So they do OSCEs in the level 5 and 6, they'll be doing professional discussions throughout. So yeah, there's definitely scope for input from clinicians to support us with lots of different bits of our assessments. I thought I'd come on to now the team, and then that'll lead me nicely into Nikki, who's going to kind of share her career journey with us in a minute. But as I said, we are quite a small team, so there's 5 of us. You can see us all there. We all work slightly different patterns, and this is oriented around the teaching model. So as you saw on my previous slide, we teach on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. So we'll all be in generally on those days, with some other people working around that based on what roles and responsibilities that they have. And we've got a real scope of kind of backgrounds in the team. So we have people like me. I'm primarily an adult clinician, but I have done bits in higher education before. I worked at Reading, I did my PhD there, so I think really fondly of it, and I fully kind of endorse everything that Carol has said about being really supportive of careers there, because that was definitely my experience with Reading. But I've also done some policy work in NHS England as well, so I've done a slightly different role as an AHP in addition to my kind of clinical role. We've also got Laura. So Laura's our admissions lead. So she does quite a lot of outward facing work. So you may have seen her if you've been to any of our webinars. And Laura's a head and neck specialist by clinical background. And then we have Abby, Tom and Nikki, who you'll hear for. And I think the other thing I wanted to say here is that I'm the only one in the team with a PhD. So I know I said earlier I won't go into my career journey too much, because it is more of a typical academic kind of route in. I've got my PhD before I came into this role, but no one else in the team has a kind of research background in that way. So again, Hertfordshire are definitely really supportive and interested, and recognise how valuable clinical experience and skill is to teaching on our programmes. I just wanted to wrap up by saying what are the kind of things that we do as a programme to work with people in clinical roles, in other kind of organisations around us. So as a programme, we have committee meetings twice a year. So these are about continually enhancing the kind of student experience on the programme. Generally, they're for people who already work with us in some capacity, so might have an apprentice on the programme, for example. But we are looking at standing up other kind of development meetings for clinicians in the area who aren't necessarily working with us in that way, but might be interested in working with us. So I can definitely share our contact details. And if you're interested in being involved in that sort of space, you can reach out to us. We also have clinicians as visiting lecturers coming to support us with teaching. So we have the Adam Brooks Cleft team who've supported us with some of our anatomy. They're going to be supporting us with some of our phonetics teaching. We've had an audiology specialist coming in to work with us again in our anatomy module. There's more and more scope for this sort of visiting lecturer contribution as we go through the programme. So we're definitely interested to hear from anyone who is interested in that and would think that they could offer something valuable based on the modules that I shared on the earlier slide. Placements are the one, again, Carol's already touched on this, so I won't say much more on that, but we work really closely. We offer educator training. So SLTs, again, have been reaching out to us and offering their support with our placements, which is really great. And again, I've touched on the assessments, but there are just 5 of us. So as we get more and more going with our programme, it will be really useful to have greater input from clinicians who can support with our assessment. And it's also about diversifying the learner experience as well, because you always get a different experience and perspective from clinicians who are practicing in different areas. So it's also really valuable to the student feedback and experience as well. And I just wanted to finish on the kind of tripartite partnership or relationship. So the apprenticeship model is built on this. So us in the University of Hertfordshire as the education provider work really closely with the apprentice and the mentor or line manager as a 3 to constantly scaffold and support the apprentices. So that's another way, I suppose, that you would be able to collaborate with higher education and also learn a little bit more about the apprenticeship model, which I know is relatively new for the SLT profession. So if that's something you're interested in. I've got a couple more slides, but I think I'll skip past these. I'm happy to share them after if that's useful, just because I'm mindful of the time and I want to make sure Nikki has her airtime on the floor. So yeah, is that okay? Nikki, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like me to stop sharing?
Yes, please. Hi, everybody. I can see some of you. The others of you, I think, have your cameras off. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but Jodie, I'm delighted to see you. Jodie and I trained together. I'm just looking for other people who I know because, you know, it's speech and language therapy, so it's a very small world. So, Emma, do I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 to 10.
5 to 10, okay. On the degree apprenticeship programme at Hertfordshire. So I do that for a few days a week, and I'm also a speech and language therapist. I work clinically for the other days a week. And Emma's just asked me to come on to talk about kind of my journey into the university world. So I'll give you a very quick overview, but if you've got questions, you can either ask me now or later, or you can pop them in the chat, whichever is easiest. So I did my postgrad diploma, my training with Jodie, who I just saw, who's now disappeared because she's on the other screen, at City in 2005 to 2007. So that was a long time ago. And then after that, so that was postgrad. And then after that, I went straight into working with children. It kind of fell into a job. It was one of those times when it was one of the cycles when there were more therapists than there were jobs, so you kind of took whatever job was offered to you. So I sort of fell into working with children. I did that in Barnet with early years clinics and mainstream schools. Was there for a couple of years. After that, I moved into special schools in Brent, where I was employed directly by the schools, and I did some team lead work there. And then about 2014, I moved into the NHS up in Hertfordshire, where I did to sort of focus on autism diagnostic clinics. So my specialism is, I would say, social communication. And in the NHS, I was focusing in on, sorry, I've just come off teaching for an hour and a quarter, so you could see that my words are all over the place. I was focusing on autism diagnostics and sort of complex cases, second opinions. I was also doing a little bit of independent practice on the side. Whilst I was doing that, I was also finishing off my master's. So when I was training at City, we had the postgrad diploma, and then there was an option to convert your master's directly afterwards, or to convert it into a master's. I didn't do that. I did a separate master's whilst I was in Brenton, finishing off in Hertfordshire. And that was in evidence-based healthcare, and that was at Oxford. The only reason it was at Oxford is because at the time that was the only place to do it, and it was a wonderful, wonderful course. And I'm not here to promote Oxford, but it's the best course I've ever done, apart from the one that we're teaching, obviously, Emma. And that was really helping me think about, am I using evidence-based practice, and how can I develop my research skills more? So I finished that in 2017, continued doing autism diagnostics. And whilst I was had my sort of general everyday role, the things that I did that might be helpful for me to talk about is I sort of picked up some opportunities as I went along the way. So because of my master's, I became a research champion for the Royal College, but you don't need to have a master's in evidence-based healthcare to do that. I think research champions are still alive and kicking in the Royal College, and it's a really good way of keeping up to date on what's going on and really championing evidence-based practice in your workplace. So that's one thing that I would recommend. As part of that, I also did some in the journals reviews for the bulletin. So again, that was just adding some very, very small publications to my belt, nowhere near as big as Emma's PhD, but useful just to think about how you can do things whilst you're working. So I was doing some article reviews for that, and I also reviewed some books for in the bulletin. I'm an Elkland tutor, and there was an opportunity to be a lead area tutor for the NELI, so the Nuffield Early Language Intervention Project, and that was for the randomized controlled trial, so I picked that one up. And that was really great. It gave me an opportunity to look at how research was being used in practice and the challenges of doing research alongside clinical work, and analysing some of that research. Again, that was just something that I could pick up along the way, and that was with Elkland and Queen's University Belfast and Oxford. Other small things that I've done that sort of helped me on my way to senior lecturer post is I did a poster presentation at the Royal College conference. I thought it would be really daunting. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and it was amazing how much everyone at my work was like, "Oh, that's really exciting," and thought it was going to be really complicated. But it wasn't actually. Like, if you've got something that you're doing that you can present. So I presented my systematic review, which was part of my master's dissertation. So that was quite nice and straightforward for me. But if you're doing something in your everyday practice, you're doing an audit, you can present that because it's really useful for everyone else to know. And again, it adds things to the CV. So that was up in Glasgow, if anyone was there a few years ago. I was also members of various SENs, and when the opportunity arose, I was a speaker coordinator and the chair for the East of England Autism SEN. It linked in really nicely with my work, and work were really supportive. And then I also there was the Edward Jenner leadership course, which was part of the NHS programs. So all of those things kind of helped me on my way. My last post in the NHS was managing the the speech and language therapy side of educational tribunals. So that was quite a highly banded post. We used to call it danger money. There was a lot of but it was a really nice kind of link into where do I want to go? Do I want to stay in autism diagnostics? I love it, but I wanted to be challenged a bit more. So that post gave me it was more of an overview of evidence across the system, and thinking more about pathways and working with other people in the team, and working with external stakeholders as well. I've really run through that very quickly. It's quite bizarre giving my CV to random people. They are not random, but relatives, people that I've not met before. So if you've got any questions, the other thing that Emma said is don't forget to say you just applied for the role, which is true. It got to that stage in my NHS post where I thought, what do I want to do next? And I thought the thing that I really want to do is some visiting lecturer work. And I contacted someone at the university and they said, oh, we're setting up an apprenticeship. I said, great, can I have a chat with someone? And literally that's how I got the post. I had a chat with our head of department. She said, apply. I applied. And I thought, I've never done lecturing before. I've never worked in a university, but actually it's lovely because I've got such a clinical background. My sessions are peppered with clinical anecdotes. And that's how I learn best. And the students have been really receptive to that. And it's been really lovely to be able to say, when I'm teaching about the development of narrative, let me tell you about what happened when I was with a client last week. I'm going to bring in some assessments, and this is how I assess narrative. This is a real life discourse from one of my clients that I've got permission to share. Let's analyse that. So even though I don't have a PhD, which may or may not be on the cards at some point in the future, it has to use background because that's essentially what our learners need. I've talked constantly for the last 8 minutes. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was really, really great. Thanks, Geraldine. I think that's our item done. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you both. So sorry, Nikki, I've just unspotlighted you because you were front and centre for a second. I'm just going to open up the floor to see whether anybody has got any questions. So please feel free to pop them in the chat or raise a hand.
What?
Carol, was that a hand?
Sorry, it was just a comment really, just to echo what Nikki was saying actually, is something about, as speech and language therapists, we're not very good at shouting about what we're doing. And actually, one of the things is share as widely, because everyone's interested, and if you see something, go for it, because you can always try, like Nikki was saying. And I think that as a profession, we're not always perhaps as confident. I may be overgeneralizing, I apologize if I am, but yeah, there's lots of things that, you see in place and think, oh, we were doing that. Yeah, just really share and enjoy the response. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Kate, you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
Well, I acted like I'd never used Teams before then. Yeah, thank you. This is really interesting because I also did the PG dip and didn't do an MSc. So I'm always a bit like, what should I be doing? I'm really interested in clinical, like being a clinical tutor. I had great experiences with my clinical tutors when I was training. And I didn't even know if it was a role that sort of still existed. I didn't know if you had to be a lecturer as well as a clinical tutor. It seems like from the stories today you don't, but could you say a bit more about the clinical tutor role?
Do you want me to take that or do you want to take that, Emma?
I was also going to say Reading can also take that first if that's helpful. Sorry, Carol, don't want to put you on the spot. I just know from working there that you probably have a slightly different and, I don't know, potentially more to say on that one.
So yeah, thanks, Emma. So it's interesting. So we used to have roles that were purely clinical tutor roles. Most of our clinical lecturers now have part of their role, which is clinical tutoring. But what often happens is that perhaps there may be some sessions available purely for clinical tutoring, which would include things like visiting students on placement, being involved in placement educator training, doing partway reviews, having your own small clinical tutor group of students. And so we do certainly offer sessions in that role. Catherine, I don't know if you want to add, because you've been a clinical tutor more recently than me.
Yeah, I have. I mean, so I start my role, my job title initially was clinical tutor, but actually I've have done lecturing alongside that all the time, even when my job title was clinical tutor rather than clinical lecturer. But yeah, there's lots and lots of depending on what am I trying to say? So you can mix and match. There are loads and loads of parts of our job, basically. And there are people on our team who prefer doing that side of things, the meeting people and sort of visiting students on placement, having a tutor group and stuff. And so there are people on our team who do more of that in their role than others. So yeah, it's very, very varied. The teaching intensive sort of clinical lecturing role is incredibly varied, and part of that is having clinical tutees. And more of it can be that if that's what you're interested in, I think. Is that fair, Carol?
Yeah, and I think that, we often do have roles that just purely focus on the clinical tutoring as well. So that's certainly, and one way where I know we have a couple of people at the moment, that's their focus, and that's also their preference. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot there, but obviously I worked at Reading, so I know about the clinic, and I just thought it might be helpful for you to go first. In the apprenticeship model, the other thing about our role, mine and Nikki's role as lecturers, is that we are also what we call apprenticeship coaches, which probably links kind of more closely to the traditional clinical tutor role. So this isn't the same for every apprenticeship at Hertfordshire, but for SLT and OT and a couple of the other AHPs, we are the ones who run those tripartite meetings with the apprentice and the NHS employer as part of our role. So kind of mentoring the apprentice through their competencies, knowledge, skills and behaviours. But at Hertfordshire, and there is a role advertised at the moment, actually, some other professions like nursing, they will have what they call the apprenticeship coach role as an individual role. So the person who's the apprenticeship coach will not be necessarily a senior lecturer as part of the teaching team. They will just be there to support that apprentice in those kind of tripartite meetings through their goals. So I know some of the other apprenticeship coaches in the other disciplines might be a midwife who's doing apprenticeship coaching for nursing. You don't necessarily need to be directly from that profession in order to kind of take up those opportunities as well. So at the moment, the SLT model is that we do that as part of our lecturer roles. That may or may not evolve, I suppose, as and when our programme grows. Nikki, do you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, Kate, one of the lovely things about the apprenticeship, and I apologise if Emma's already said that, is because we work really closely with the workplace, all the apprentices have a work-based mentor in their workplace, which is probably similar-ish to the clinical tutor role in the university, but you're based in the workplace. So your role within the workplace, have you said all this already, Emma?
I touched on it briefly,
okay.
but I ran a bit out of time.
Okay, so one of the so the role within for the work-based mentor is to be aware of what we're teaching, but also to support that integration of the learning at university and the learning in the workplace, so that it's really well coordinated. So we as part of the tripartite model, we have review meetings where the work-based mentor comes as well as us and the learner, the apprentice, and we all work together to help make sure that learner is progressing. So that's a really nice way of trying to integrate that into your current workplace rather than doing it as an extra, is by taking on that work-based mentor role if there's an opportunity to do so.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. I just want to highlight quickly a question that's come into the chat, which I can see that Carol's answered, but just in case anyone from Hertfordshire wanted to add. So it just says, I'm interested in linking in with students doing their dissertations. Is it common that students don't already have a topic or clinical question in mind and would welcome suggestions for projects? So Reading have responded that yes, students do welcome suggestions for the projects and always enjoy doing these in conjunction with practice. Emma, thanks so much, Nikki, for coming. Really appreciate it. Emma, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
So I suppose our perspective is we haven't got to that part of our programme yet because we're so new, so we haven't actually delivered that. It's another couple of years off for our learners. I think there's definitely going to be people that would benefit from support around coming up with ideas. Again, it's a slightly different model of learning. So this apprentice is embedded within their workplace. So they're probably going to be thinking about approaching the dissertation slightly differently to kind of students from Reading who aren't necessarily in employment at that time, because it might be that they are aware of service improvement initiatives or projects within their workplace already. They might have come up with some ideas with their manager, but we are very happy to link with employers around that module. We've already had actually people reach out to us about being involved in that in our dissertation module. So it's definitely not a done deal just because of the model being slightly different, but I would expect that some of them might come in with kind of projects and ideas that are already, you know, really viable and relevant for their workplace based on their roles, but absolutely not everyone. So very happy to speak to anyone who's interested in that.
Thanks, Emma. Faye, thank you for being so patient. Do you want to come in with your question?
No, not to worry. I guess from my perspective, I've dipped my toe in a little bit since I did clinical examining this year at Reading, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and that was fab. I had a great day. And then for the last 6 years, I've guest lectured on the ENT medicine module, and I guess I kind of come into the university for a sort of brief period during the year, and then I you know back out again. And when I guest lecture, I do it on my day off because I'm not released from work to come and lecture. So it's how do I get involved more while still recognising that I love what I do working for Frimley and the NHS. So it's that's why I'm here today, just to kind of work out how can I sort of have that touch point with university more often or on a regular basis, and what that might look like. So that was my sort of question, if you like, or thoughts.
Don't know who wants to answer that one first. If I come to you, Carol, is that all right?
Yeah, thanks, and thank you, Faye, for all the guest lecturing and everything that you've done. I'm glad you enjoyed the clinical exams. It's a really interesting one. It's almost like, so what's the next step, isn't it? So some of it could be maybe being involved in dissertations as well, or as well as dissertations, perhaps just projects that you have that you want to do within your workplace that university staff, you could engage, you know, with university staff. Or it could be something like, as you know, we've got this temporary role coming up, applying perhaps for saying, well, I might want to do this, but I want to do, you know, just 1 day a week or something for a short period of time. So it's perhaps taking those opportunities, and then also, is there any other areas in terms of if you wanted to do more lecturing? But I suppose there is that almost, to be in much more regularly, you almost need a sort of identified role within the university. I think, I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Catherine. I know that you sort of gradually came in. Lots of people have gradually come in, done sort of a similar pathway, and then perhaps taken up a day a week or come in to do some maternity cover.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo what you say. I think, Carol, I think the job is a full-time job, but I think there's scope for people to do less than that. And I only work 2 days a week, for example, and lots of the team work for a smaller amount of time. So yeah, that having a sort of a role, but for less of the week might be a way to start, especially in a temporary contract, to see if you like it.
Yeah, that's the thing as well. And I'm very conscious that my manager's going to be watching this because she wants a recording of it, so she'll be crying in the corner. Yeah, no, I think it's looking for opportunities as well, and when they come up, but it's that balance, isn't it, with NHS commitments? Yeah.
It's such a tricky one. I think that's kind of been my rock and hard place because, as I mentioned, I did my PhD at Reading. I've been clinical before. I went back into clinical practice actually after I had done my time at Reading. I was like, what am I going to do with this? And I've always found it really difficult to kind of pick which space I want to work in because I've always felt like there isn't an opportunity for me to kind of do both together. Like, I don't really want to be doing 2 separate jobs and trying to balance that in my life, because that's an overhead, isn't it? And there's annual leave and all of those personal things that are a challenge. And I think that's why I've been a bit of a hopper. So I've kind of hopped between the different spaces across my career, really, because of that exact problem. But I think what Carol said is a good idea. And I think I got into it through doing, as Carol said, a fixed term contract initially. I think it was part-time, and then I've kind of dipped my toe in, and then sometimes gone all in, and then decided I'm going to go back to clinical actually after that. So I have enjoyed doing that personally for me, that transition, but I know, that it doesn't work for everybody, and it depends on a lot of other kind of personal circumstances and situations that you have. But yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, I think, in our profession, in terms of how do we kind of bring these 2 worlds together a little bit more. And I think that's why actually when the apprenticeship role came up, I kind of thought, oh great, at least it's another way that we're trying to integrate these 2 worlds in a little bit more of a dynamic fashion. But yeah, it's a tough decision.
I think depending on what you do as well. I mean, Laura's on the call with me as well. She does what I do. And I think that, Voice on a Pro is quite specialist. So hopping is not necessarily easy for us to do.
Yeah.
Because there are only certain centres. And so, yeah, it's you sort of take the leap or you don't, I think. Yeah.
Carol, sorry, did you want to come back into that to add another point?
Yeah, sorry, Kim. So, and I think, what Emma said, everyone's had that sort of, there comes to a point where there's sort of a bit of a choice, because having 2 things running in parallel can be quite challenging. Having a university clinic is helpful, because actually you can carry on some clinical work there. And certainly people who have joined us who've got very strong links with services that you can't, that we couldn't offer within the clinic, the university clinic. Actually, part of the role is keeping the link in some of the clinical practice with those specialist services, and maybe taking students with them. And so we have had a number of different people doing slightly different things, but I agree with Emma, it is quite hard. Then it becomes, hard to juggle everything. But the university clinic, I think, does offer some additional support for that, or continuance. Thanks, Geraldine.
Thanks. Catherine, did you want to add to that point as well?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kim, we're being very patient. All I wanted to say was that in the clinic, I also didn't want to do sort of 2 roles, hopping around, and just from a brain space point of view, having 1 role made sense to me at the time when I moved across. But at the clinic, we're really keen to for people who have specialisms in particular areas to develop things within the clinic in their area. So I'm just sort of reiterating really what Carol says, that it's not you come to the university and suddenly you're not a clinician, I think. So yeah.
Thank you all. And I quickly just wanted to add, I'm so sorry I haven't been able to upload the document. Something's going on with my teams for the career framework, and I don't know if it's something that you've already kind of done, Faye, but obviously we've all got the kind of education pillar of practice that we need to develop, and I don't know how much you're wanting to move into kind of an academic role, but you can map yourself about where you are on the framework and kind of what's next and what you need to do, and then use that to have conversations as part of your PDP and your supervision and appraisals, so that some of that time can be carved out to support the development of that pillar of practice. And so I can see Melissa's popped into the chat that they had some students that they took on to do the dissertation, and so that was a way that they were kind of perhaps more involved but still within the workplace, and then again kind of benefits the service but would support your professional development. But I don't know kind of what you had in terms of plans for next steps, and I feel like I should confess very late in the meeting that I'm not a speech therapist. So I don't know, but the framework is another resource that you could discuss with your manager potentially. Kim, thank you so much. I feel like you've been on hold forever. Would you like to come in with your question?
Yeah, that's okay, don't worry. I was actually going to hop on to Faye's question kind of on the back end of it. I too did some clinical examining with Catherine actually, and last academic year, so it's lovely to see you again. I just suppose, and also Faye, my manager is in the room, and that is Melissa. So I'm going to ask a question in front of her. Is there any? I suppose the difficulty that we've got is because the time is so precious, and we are in such kind of, the demand is so high in relation to our capacity. Is there any kind of funds or grants or things that potentially we could apply for, or that universities have, that could support us doing it in practice? Because I think that's the bit where it's great that we're supporting students, and we're trying to develop that as part of our practice, but having that kind of foot in to even have the headspace to possibly do some of it ourselves as well would be great. Just wondered if that's a thing that we could potentially look into.
Could I just clarify something, Kim, if that's okay? So do you mean sort of having sort of funding to perhaps do some work within the workplace, but with the university? Is that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
either kind of linked with universities, or that, like, if there's any funding that you guys do that potentially then could also link with a student that then could link in, just thinking kind of in a more expansive way that potentially could involve us on the ground as well as students, having those links in with doing or starting research. Just in case, in my case, I'm full-time, and that leap to doing that, I'm a sole provider for myself. Financially, that's really scary, and in this current climate, I just can't. I can't make the math effectively. So if there's any kind of way or knowledge or financial things that I or others on the call are missing, that potentially we could build some of that in, it would be great to hear. If there isn't, then absolutely that's fine, but I just thought it was worth asking when I had you guys in the room.
So there's we can apply for funding. So for example, with the I think Melissa, with the student that worked with you, we had funding for the student to come in and then be available for you to be available within a service to support sort of dissertations and working. In terms of monies for the speech and language therapists themselves, there's a link about fees and funding. I mean, specifically around PhDs, but in one of the in the last slide, I think it's a challenge. I mean, it's a really good question. I'm going to go and have a look. So often, if we do a research project, there will be some part of that as so apply for an external grant rather than something within the university. There's often funding as part of that for speech and language therapists. So I know that Emma Pagnamenta did a project some time ago, and there was some funding involved for speech and language therapists as well. And so it's maybe perhaps a question of thinking about which projects might be coming out or which projects you would be interested in, so that when there's all the NIHR, National Institute of Health Research, funding streams as well. But that's something that I know less about. But Emma Pagnamenta, who I put as a link on our last slide, she has a lot more information about that and has been successful previously. I think they've just recently got another grant. And so she would be the person to contact about that.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks,
Okay.
Carol. Emma, are you wanting to come in?
I was just going to add, yeah, probably I will check it out, your question about the university funding. Again, with the apprenticeship model, it would probably be for kind of apprentices that are working with their employer, their current employer, because they're obviously employed in an NHS setting or a clinical setting already. But I suppose I was reflecting a little bit more on your point, Karen, about the NIHR grant. I did do a PhD and I applied for my own grant and I got it, and I wrote that while I was clinical, and it was like hell. I'm not going to lie. I had to work all the time to write that every weekend for about 8 months, doing my pilot data collection, writing it. And it was a really stressful interview because I thought, I've given up so much of my time for this. Like, I need to get this grant. This is such I have to get this. I've already given a year of my life into this. And I did get it, thank God, but the success rate is small for grants, you know. So I do think my kind of advice would be, if you're interested in the research angle, you need a really great academic colleague who's got time and capacity to support you. So that's how I actually got in. I had a great network of people. So yes, I was giving up my time on weekends, but I had a really engaged supervisor who was supporting me with the grant development, with the writing, with the interview prep, so that when I went in there, I was, you know, I was doing the best that I could to succeed in that moment. So it is tough, though. I was working, you know, as a band 6 full-time clinical, and I basically gave my weekends to do that. I was one of the lucky ones that was successful, but you know, there's always a higher proportion of people that aren't. So I do understand there is a risk with that, and obviously, if you've got a personal life and things, you've got to decide if that's a decision, that a cost that kind of works for you. So maybe leaping into something like a master's or a PhD cold isn't kind of the first way in, but I do think thinking of smaller projects or initiatives is probably a more gentle way to start. But if you are keen on doing the kind of typical PhD route, then I would say start speaking to kind of academic colleagues who are in lecturer roles and who have grants already from the places where you're interested in going. So if you want to go to the NIHR, for example, you want to speak to someone who's already got an NIHR grant, because they will understand that process and be able to guide you in the most effective way. I went to the Stroke Association, so again, my team had been successful in getting grants from there in the past. So and my experience is that academics are always very open to have those discussions with clinicians. Actually, they love working with clinicians. They love speaking to clinicians and understanding what their kind of ideas are. So I always found that was sort of a door that was open. But I did have to give up my spare time to kind of get there, which I know isn't always an option for everyone.
Thank you. Laura's put some helpful comments into the chat, if I could just bring people's attention to those as well. I'm just mindful of time, so I'm just going to take the last question from Helena, if that's all right.
Thank you. Oh, my camera is off. There it is. Thank you, everyone. It's really interesting. I off the back of Faye's question, I suppose, but everybody, and a bit of what Nikki was saying earlier. I love you. So I work full time as a clinician, and I love training, delivering training to my team, but using clinical videos of myself with patients and bringing that into the training. And I know when I was a student, I loved the lectures where lecturers, or we had guest lecturers, and they brought videos of themselves with patients and brought assessments in. And so I am really interested in things like being a guest lecturer, but I don't want to lose any of my clinical time. I love the clinical time. And just wondering, do people, when you're guest lecturing, do people get paid for that? Yeah, what that looks like as if you're a guest lecturer, so not necessarily a clinical lecturer all the time, but just coming in on your own specialism.
Yeah, generally the answer is yes. There are some people who will say that they are released from work to do it as part of their role, in which case they don't get paid for that. So one example is the cleft team. They've said it's part of their remit to do this education with higher education, so therefore they're coming to do that. We're not going to pay them, but they're going to deliver that as part of their role. There'll be other people that actually, you know, they don't get paid to do it, therefore we would be paying them as a visiting lecturer to do that for the time. So it's a bit of a discussion to be had, essentially, on depending on if the person's work is releasing them or not for that time. And also in terms of kind of the university model as well, you know, if we've got a lecturer in our team who's already got that exact kind of specialism, can we make a business case for bringing someone in for that externally? So there's that as well to be factored into the decision.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would say the same as Emma. We certainly pay and also pay for some preparation time. But again, it's but I think what's interesting is the opportunities for external lecturers do come up just because it's it's a mobile workforce, so we're currently we've got a couple of maternity leaves on and things, and so yeah, things do come up to allow you to dip your toe in as well and see if you like it. And it's great to know that there's interest out there as well.
Yeah. I think, would you agree, Carol, that's where it's useful to kind of, if you're a clinician on the ground, to be reaching out to us, because those jobs don't necessarily get advertised, but it might be that actually, oh great, if we can get this teaching covered, that's amazing, because then we can get on with, we don't need to work overtime that week, we can actually get on with our kind of business as usual situation. So that's where I think the link, having the relationship and the links come into play, basically, because that's where those opportunities would be kind of identified. It's not really advertised as a formal role, that sort of situation. It's more of a kind of ad hoc arrangement, or we might seek out people, like with the cleft team, we sought them out because we knew we needed that and we didn't have anyone on the team that could cover that, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think as well that we certainly do keep a list as well. So if someone's has contacted us to say, I'm interested in this, and this is my sort of specialism, we will keep a note of it. And if there isn't anything at that time, we will, certainly then reach out if things do crop up.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So I'm just going to kind of bring the session to a close. I'm just mindful that a few people have needed to drop off as well. So just want to say a massive thank you to everybody for taking time out of your very hectic work days for coming in today. I hope you found it to be a useful session, and also a massive thank you to Carol and Catherine and Emma and Nikki for taking out time out of there, which I'm sure are also very hectic days, to come and support the session. As I mentioned at the beginning, I will send around the recordings, the presentations, and all the contact details, but if anybody would like me to link them up with the universities, just please drop me an email and let me know which university you would like to be linked in, and I will collate a list and send that to the universities following on from this. Likewise, if you've got any other questions, please do stay on, or again, you can send me an email. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. I hope you have a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week, and hopefully cross paths with you all again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.